when 64-year-old John Manin and his neighbors finally caught the demon that had been brutally killing people in their Ugandan village for 14 years. They discovered something so massive and terrifying that even the authorities refused to let them kill it. This wasn't some serial killer or supernatural force. This was a 16-foot, 2,000-pound monster that had been silently stalking families for over a decade, and the way it hunted was so calculated and vicious that anyone who saw it in action never lived to tell the tale. But before I tell you how John's terrifying stakeout unfolded, I want you to try something that reveals a dark truth about human nature. Next time you're in an elevator with strangers, try this experiment. Stand facing the back wall instead of the door. Don't say anything, don't explain yourself. Just quietly turn around and face the wrong direction. What you'll witness is fascinating and disturbing. Within 30 seconds, most people in that elevator will also turn around to face the back wall with you, even though it makes no logical sense. This is called social proof conformity, and it shows how easily humans can be manipulated into doing completely irrational things, just because someone else is doing it. It's the same psychological mechanism that allows cults and mass hysteria to spread. Try it and tell me in the comments how many people turned around with you. Now, back to John's nightmare in Uganda. Our story takes place in a small village in Uganda where John Manin had lived his entire life. This 64-year-old grandfather had 9 children and 31 grandchildren, and he remembered when this place was a happy, thriving community where families felt safe and children could play freely. But starting in 1991, something changed forever. People began disappearing in the most horrific ways possible. They would vanish without a trace, only to be found days later, brutally mutilated and torn apart, or they would simply vanish forever, leaving behind devastated families with no answers. Over 14 years, this unknown force had killed 83 people from John's village. Let me put that in perspective. That's 10% of the entire population. Imagine living somewhere where 1 out of every 10 people you know gets brutally murdered by something you can't identify, can't predict, and can't stop. Every single family in this village had lost someone they loved. The attacks were so random and vicious that the entire community started believing they were dealing with something supernatural, a demon that God had sent to punish them, or maybe the devil himself. What's most chilling is how the village adapted to living with constant death. They just accepted it. Sometimes people get torn apart and killed. They would tell each other, "There's nothing we can do about it. It's just part of life here." Can you imagine that level of psychological trauma? An entire community so broken by fear that they normalized brutal murder as just something that happens. But John refused to accept this. When a little boy went missing one morning, a child who reminded John of his own grandchildren, something snapped inside him. John gathered his neighbors and made them an offer they couldn't refuse. "Tonight we're going to find this demon and end it." He was so passionate, so determined, that he managed to convince people who had given up hope to risk their lives for answers. They decided to stake out an area they called the butchery, the spot where most of the 83 victims had either been found mutilated or were last seen alive. This area sat right next to a large, dark lake that everyone in the village feared, but no one could explain why. For 6 straight nights, John and his volunteers crouched in tall reeds by the lake, watching and waiting for their demon to appear. They were exhausted, terrified, and starting to lose hope. Each night they saw nothing, just dark, still water and empty land. People began to think John was wrong, that maybe there really was nothing they could do to catch this supernatural force, but John wasn't giving up. On the 7th night, he made a decision that would change everything. John decided to set a trap. He and the villagers hung fresh organ meat from trees near the butchery, believing that whatever was killing people was hunting them for their flesh. As they crouched in the bushes on that 7th night, hours passed with nothing but silence. People were getting restless, ready to give up forever. But then, between 4 and 5 a.m., while it was still pitch black, they heard something that made their blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl began echoing across the water. It was so deep and powerful that John could feel his body literally vibrating from the sound. As the growling got louder, they saw ripples disturbing the surface of the black lake. Something massive was moving beneath the water, and it was heading straight for shore. Then, in the minimal light of early morning, a huge dark silhouette burst from the lake with a roar that filled the air. But this wasn't a demon or a supernatural force. This was something far more terrifying because it was completely real. The creature charged past John's hiding spot and bit down on the organ meat hanging from the trees. But John had been smart. He'd put hooks in the meat, and as soon as the monster bit down, it was trapped. John sprinted back to the village screaming for help, and 50 villagers came running. When they reached the tree, they found the largest saltwater crocodile ever discovered in Uganda, 16 feet long and over 2,000 pounds of pure killing machine for 14 years. This massive predator had been using a hunting strategy so perfect and terrifying that it seemed supernatural. Crocodiles are ambush predators. They can hold their breath for up to an hour and remain completely motionless underwater. This beast would wait by the shore in the dark, grab its victim in its powerful jaws, and drag them underwater so quickly and silently that no witnesses ever survived. The crocodile would then perform what is called a death roll, spinning its victim underwater until they drowned, before storing the body underwater to decompose and become easier to eat. The reason this crocodile terrorized the village for so long without being identified is absolutely chilling. Saltwater crocodiles are incredibly intelligent hunters. They study their prey's patterns, learn when people come to the water, and strike with surgical precision. This particular crocodile had learned the villagers' routines and would position itself perfectly to ambush them when they were most vulnerable. And here's the most disturbing part. Anyone who actually saw the crocodile attack didn't survive to warn others. It was the perfect predator. When authorities arrived, they refused to let the villagers kill the crocodile, despite the fact that it had murdered 83 people over 14 years. Instead, it was relocated to another area. The village finally had their answers, but the psychological trauma remained. An entire community had been terrorized by a single animal that was so efficient at killing that they believed they were dealing with supernatural forces. John's bravery and determination had solved a 14-year mystery that had claimed 10% of his village's population. But here's what will keep you awake tonight. This story isn't unique. Crocodiles kill an estimated 1,000 people per year worldwide, and many of these attacks go unreported or unsolved, especially in remote areas. There could be other villagers right now living in terror of what they think are demons or supernatural forces, when in reality they are being hunted by perfectly real predators that are just too intelligent and efficient for their victims to identify. The most haunting aspect of this case is just the deaths. It's how an entire community's worldview was shaped by terror they could not understand. For 14 years, these people lived believing that random, brutal death was just a fact of life, that some supernatural force had decided their village was cursed. The psychological damage of living with that level of helplessness and fear is almost impossible to comprehend. What terrifies me most is how quickly a community can normalize horror when they can't explain it. These people accepted that 10% of their population would be brutally murdered because the alternative, that they were being hunted by something they could fight, seemed impossible. Drop A if this story makes you think twice about dark water, and comment John if you have the same courage as this grandfather who refused to accept that evil was unstoppable. Follow Dark Case Files, because next week I'm covering a case where an entire family disappeared from their locked house, and what investigators found in their basement suggests they were alone in that house for weeks before they vanished. The security footage will haunt your dreams. And I'm warning you now, you won't sleep after seeing what was living under their floorboards.